The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
Seeing the details of my life splattered across the newspapers was the last thing I ever wanted or expected to happen, and it had devastated me. I am and have always been a private person, feeling uncomfortable whenever attention is thrown my way, and the prospect of my dirty laundry being aired in public felt like a nightmare. Not only had Emile ripped my family apart, but he had also humiliated me. Left alone to pick up the pieces of everything he had destroyed, I was dragged into the spotlight and paraded through the headlines without a second thought of how it affected me. Vicky Cilliers, from her book, I Survived, A True Story. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is part 3, Revelations, the conclusion of I Survived, episode 144, 2ndCast, that we have been building towards. So Vicky Cilliers has learned that her husband of 3 years has been arrested for the attempted murder of her. She is completely shocked and feeling vulnerable and alone as she's wearing a back brace, recovering from devastating injuries to her ribs, spine, and pelvis after both her main and backup parachutes failed when she went skydiving, something she had done 2,654 times previously. Stuck home recovering, alone, managing a 3-year-old and newborn, Vicky is mightily struggling. She asks the police if she can speak to her husband, Emile Cilliers, and is refused as this is an ongoing investigation. I Survived is Vicky's account of what happened to her during this god-awful time in her life. Quote, "How could the man I married and had children with do something so inherently evil to me?" End quote. And where was Emile? What was going on with him? So one of my favorite podcasts is Crime Analyst, hosted by Laura Richards, who is the expert on coercive control. And she featured 2 episodes about the parachute plot murder that I highly recommend to you. Her guest was Constable Maddie Hanna of the Wiltshire Police, who arrested Emile Cilliers. Constable Hanna described her experience after arresting Emile, noting that he did not utter a single word. Now, we all react to stress differently, but someone might expect someone being falsely arrested to exclaim, "Bloody hell! Why? For what?" But Emile Cilliers is completely silent. His office, room, and locker were searched without him saying or asking a question, which I find odd, as did Constable Hanna. Also, on October 6, 2024, Maddie Hanna appeared on the UK television show This Morning. Recalling her interview with Emile Cilliers, she mentioned that he made her feel very uncomfortable because he had this over-the-top confidence, which bordered on the extreme. He was booked and he was asked if he wanted a solicitor. Now, with something this serious, the vast majority of people will say they want a solicitor. But Emile declined. And this interview with Constable Hanna and her male colleague, it lasted 6 hours. Again, he was offered a solicitor. He declined. Now, incredibly confident, he spoke about his life and his relationship with Victoria, providing a lot of information that formed the basis of this case. He wasn't happy in his marriage, and he wanted out. He had a girlfriend, engaged in affairs, and attended sex parties. His strategy seems to be that by being open and talking, he is demonstrating that he has nothing to hide. Oddly, the only area where Emile was vague was regarding the events leading to and surrounding the parachute center incident. Whenever he was questioned about it, he would attempt to distract by veering off in a different direction, prompting the constable to bring him back to the question she asked, refocusing him. She noted he really enjoyed talking about himself, and he did not at any time proclaim his innocence. Meanwhile, back at the house, Vicky calls a friend to watch the children, while she went to the police station to make her videoed statement. She told the officers that she, quote, knew something was wrong straight away, end quote, when she jumped. There were too many twists in the canopy, and it wasn't floating properly. She cut it away and deployed the reserve chute, but it was even more twisted. As she struggled to gain control, everything went black. Well, the officers asked about her marriage to Emile. Was it happy? And Vicky said, yes, it was fine. But in her mind, she was thinking that every marriage has its problems. His revolved around finances and infidelity. And saying that it's fine is probably a mistake. As for more details about the parachute, Vicky said it was a rented kit. Had Emile had access to this kit? Rewinding her memories of the day, it occurred to her that April, her daughter, had had to use the bathroom, and Emile took her, and the parachute was on his back. And that was not good, she realized. This is an attempted murder charge. This is serious. So the police then downloaded all of the texts between Vicky and Emile, with Vicky turning beet red, realizing the intimate details of their marriage would be exposed to strangers. She again requested to speak with Emile, which was turned down. He was under investigation. Heading home, she feared she couldn't take care of herself, let alone 2 kids. What was she going to do now? That night, staring up at the ceiling, thoughts spun around. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but they'd been improving. He had to be innocent. This was injustice, she raged. With Dad and Francis there, Vicky did get some hugs and some of the support that she badly needed. The police returned a few days later, notifying Vicky that Emile was out on bail. He was not permitted any contact with her or the kids, nor was he allowed in Wiltshire. He was at the base, where they had found pictures of his girlfriend, but none of her and the kids. Quote, he's been having an affair for a while. They had been planning on moving in together. We've seen through the text messages and from Emile himself that he had told her your marriage was over and that you cheated on Emile and that Ben wasn't his son. He also accrued lots of debts. Essentially, he's been planning to set up a new life with his girlfriend. End quote. What? Her blood boiled. While she still didn't believe he'd tampered with her parachute, his actions and betrayal had been the cause of all of this. She was seething beyond furious. She ripped her wedding rings off and flung them across the room. He said he wasn't Ben's father? And the police asked her if she would like to make a new statement. Raging, brokenhearted, humiliated, yes, Vicky did want to make a new statement. Going to the station, she ranted for a few hours about her husband's lies, spending, other women, secretive holidays, rants punctuated by crying. The contrast with those first blissful years together and what reality had become was stark. He made her feel terrible. He blamed her past insecurities for what she saw going on now in their marriage, and her intuition had been right all along. Police then explained that the parachute's errors came from the failure of 2 crucial loops. Now, Vicky was an instructor. Was there a feasible explanation for this? And Vicky knew there were not. These loops, these slinks, quote, slinks do not break. They really do not, end quote. And her slinks had been missing. They asked her if anything odd had happened recently. Her mind flashed back to the gas leak and the blood on the lever behind the cooker. Emile mysteriously staying at the barracks that night to avoid the morning traffic, something he'd never done before. And she filled the police in on this sequence of events, even as she wondered to herself, why was he having an affair? Wasn't she good enough? Why had he destroyed their beautiful family? Now, none of them, not Vicky, Dad, or Francis, were coping well with the investigation. Her father and stepmom were not young either, and Vicky knew she had to send them home. Fortunately, April's childminder recommended a few friends who could help out, rotating their shifts to fill in the gaps for Vicky. It took some time and a lot of trial and error, topped with tenacity, but Vicky figured out how to manage both the kids and herself. At home, she was lonely, but also insulated from the press as the story broke of Emile's arrest. She posted a sad statement on her Facebook about Emile's arrest, only to have it reprinted in the newspapers. There would be overwhelming media scrutiny that left Vicky feeling exposed, and people she trusted would betray her trust. Ever the physical therapist, Vicky worked out every day, determined to get her body back. Range of motion, stretches. She retaught her muscles how to fully function. And Ben giggled as Mummy was so silly. After 3 months, she could carry Ben upstairs to bed, first in a carrier and later in her arms. Social services visited every 10 days, with Vicky attending monthly meetings with them. Also in attendance were a healthcare employee and an Army welfare worker that Vicky felt were on her side. The restrictions placed on her, like having to inform social services if she and the children were sleeping anywhere else, that was annoying. And oh, I felt my American rising up. He's arrested and they're making her jump through hoops. That had to be insulting and beyond annoying. Why was she being treated like a criminal? Emile did sporadically see the kids, with his ex-wife Carly having to chauffeur them to these visits. The police came by regularly to chat, not sharing a whole lot of information though. And then one day, an army of officers completely surprised Vicky with a search warrant for her property. Fortunately, she left for a dentist appointment. Arriving back home, her house was destroyed. Carpets ripped up, contents everywhere. She saw a gas specialist removing the valve from the metal pipe by the cooker. Snapping at an officer, Vicky went upstairs until they left, much later that evening. Quote, I have no control over my life, she realized in dismay. End quote. Worse, at night, she experienced flashbacks, being on the plane, not wanting to jump, spinning violently, fighting for her life. All of her hopes and dreams had smashed to the earth that day. Had the man she loved and married tried to kill her? As their wedding anniversary came around, Vicky learned that Emile faced new charges for attempting to murder her by sabotaging the gas pipe. Because the children were home when the gas leak occurred, Emile could no longer see them. So if you recall, when Vicky called him about the leak, he asked her if she turned on the stove. And she laughed and said no, she wasn't going to blow up the house. Well, the truth is, Emile attempted to cause a gas explosion that would kill Vicky and his children, who are just collateral damage. He was going to move on with a new girlfriend. And this is psychopathy and pure evil. Well, as a result, April and Ben were placed on the Children's Protection Register due to the risk Emile represented to them. What was happening? Vicky was swirling in a vortex. When April asked where Daddy was, she'd say he was at work. Well, could they FaceTime? No, sweetheart, causing April to get angry and yell at her mommy. She FaceTimes with her grandparents. Why couldn't she with Daddy? Oh, this poor little girl. Her world's turned upside down too. As time went by with no additional information from the police, Vicky grew fearful, dreaming that Emile was standing over her as she slept, waking with a jolt, her heart racing. She went to see a psychiatrist who assured her that this was a normal response to an abnormal situation. In December 2015, her maternity leave ended, with Vicky resuming work, which was terribly intimidating. Yet, she threw herself into a sports physiotherapy master's program, grading with merit in August 2026. Occasionally, friends would comment on how well she was coping. With Vicky wanting to laugh, she had no fucking choice but to cope. 2 years after the fall, in January 2017, Emile had another bail hearing scheduled. At work, Vicky's boss called her into his office, where she found 2 police officers waiting for her. The decision had been made. Quote, Emile is being formally charged with your attempted murder on 2 counts and reckless endangerment of the children's lives. End quote. The world crashed around her. While she had wondered on and off if Emile could possibly have tried to kill her, this was the reality. They believed he had. He was going to trial, and Vicky would be called as a witness. The nightmare wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The police had investigated several scenarios. One, that Vicky had sabotaged her own parachute, which was ridiculous with the effort that she had put in the hospital to get back to her children. 2, that somebody else did it, targeting a random skydiver who happened to be Vicky. 3, that there was a malfunction, extremely highly improbable given the checks that the center employed. Or 4, that her husband had tried to kill Vicky and the kids. Only the 4th scenario was valid, according to the evidence. Learning that Emile was out on bail left Vicky feeling like she was a sitting duck at home. If he did want to kill her, he could easily push in and do so. But pushing on, she kept working and focusing on the kids. And finally, in October 2017, the trial began. As a witness, Vicky was not permitted in court until after she had testified. The Guardian reported that Crown Prosecutor Ian Harris stated, quote, anyone hearing this case cannot fail to be struck by the callousness, the deliberation that went into the 2 attempts to murder someone he had said only a few years before that he would love and protect. It is a shocking betrayal. It's quite clear that Cilliers was trying to engineer a situation where he could kill his wife, run off with his lover, and collect the money from an insurance policy while having a lot of sympathy because his wife had died in a dreadful accident. End quote. Evidence would show that there was a £120,000 insurance policy on Victoria Cilliers, and Emile had racked up £22,000 of debt. Today, that insurance policy is worth about £170,000 or 225,000 American dollars. As for his debts, it's equivalent to £31,000 or just over $40,000 today. Crown Prosecutor Harris also spoke of Victoria Cilliers, with her 2,600 jumps under her belt, who thought she was going to be on a routine parachute jump. Quote, to her horror, her main parachute and her reserve failed. She miraculously survived. End quote. In the year before Emile and Victoria married, Emile had packed parachutes to save money for their 2011 wedding, and he used those packing skills to sabotage his wife's parachute. Reading the newspapers the next day, Vicky learned that Emile's lover was Stephanie Cilliers, and that he had also conducted a sexual relationship with his ex-wife Carly at the same time. Vicky dropped to her knees. While she and Carly were not best friends, she had helped with the kids, and all the while she and Emile were having sex behind her back. She further learned that before the jump, Emile had added her to his insurance, maximizing the policy. Witnesses included the chief instructor at the parachute center, who explained that Vicky Cilliers had survived because she landed in an exceptionally soft field that had just been plowed. Combined with her light weight and the fact that the jump was lower than usual, these factors contributed to her survival. The prosecuting barrister asked if the slinks could have broken mid-jump. No, it was highly unlikely it is such a strong piece of equipment. Anything strong enough to break slinks would have broken other equipment as well, and there was none. Instead, quote, "What I thought was most unusual is that there was not only no damage, but actually there was no visible sign that either of the lines had been under load. I began to wonder if the slinks had ever been there at all," end quote. Could this have happened innocently? Unlikely. The only possibility was that first aiders or medics at the scene had removed them, but they had not. This had not happened either. Emile's trip to the toilet with April came up, and the prosecutor pointed out that the parachute was heavy and bulky. There was no reason to take it with him to make a potty run. But Emile faced a conundrum. When the weather was poor and Vicky wasn't going to jump that day, the dilemma: what was he going to do with a tampered hired rig? He couldn't put it back in the store and hope that Vicky would get the same one the next day. Instead, he suggested Victoria keep it overnight in her locker, which is not the usual procedure. The prosecutor delved into Emile's behavior that day, acting out of character, keeping track of the weather forecast, his enthusiasm about his wife jumping, having a good time with a woman he no longer cared for, who he was planning on leaving. And then, witnesses reported hearing Victoria screaming as she helplessly fell. Reading the papers, headlines such as, "Army Sergeant tried to murder his wife so he could run off with Tinder lover," "Love Rat Cilliers accused of tampering with his wife's parachute when on advanced packing course," and of course, his love texts to Stephanie, quote, "You have no idea how much you mean to me," end quote. And Vicky's text to Emile, quote, "Are you trying to kill me?" end quote. Vicky was just devastated reading all of this. Arriving at Winchester Crown Court, it was Vicky's turn to testify. The room was massive, and she wondered if Emile would look at her. Sitting behind the glass, staring at the floor, was her husband. A lawyer approached the stand, and it began. She told them all what happened during the fall, and she actually said she wasn't sure about her main parachute, that she may have cut away a good parachute because her confidence was so eroded. Now, this baffled the prosecution because she had said nothing like this in her previous interviews. Now, victims of coercive control will do this. Their stories will change, there will be hedging and hesitation. We may not understand this, but this is a statistical fact. Emile is a manipulator. He's a psychopath. Recall how he charmed and love-bombed Vicky. For years, he manipulated Vicky's thinking and her head work, that is, that voice in her head, which questioned reality, questioned her memory, instilled doubts about herself, which spills out in her testimony. Questions about how long Emile was gone taking April to the toilet came. She originally told the police it was 5 to 10 minutes. Now she said it was 2 or 3 minutes. Was she lying? Well, no. Vicky explained that she was very angry when she was interviewed. She had just found out about Emile's affairs, and she made it sound worse than it was because she was humiliated and wanted revenge. Pressed on this, had she said anything untrue? Quote, I don't think I lied. I just painted a worse picture. It was the worst possible time. End quote. She writes that she wasn't trying to protect Emile, but she didn't want to sway the jury against him either. She just wanted the truth to come out, whatever that might be. So how long had he taken going to the toilet with April? If you recall, it had taken so long that she went to check to see what the holdup was. So now she suggested somewhere between the two estimations, 2 to 3 minutes to 5 to 10 minutes. How qualified was Victoria in skydiving? An advanced freefall instructor, she had completed thousands of jumps. Main parachutes fail roughly once in 750 jumps. But what were the chances of the reserve parachute failing as well? 1 in a million, Vicky replied as the truth of this shook her. A shaken Vicky was now asked about stowing the hired kit in her locker rather than giving it in. Yes, Emile had suggested she hold on to it, but instead of saying that this was odd as she had previously, Vicky said it was fine as it would save her time if she was going to jump the next day. Questions turned to her marriage. Well, it had been going well until November 2014, when Emile went on a ski trip and came home distant and unsure of what he wanted. She was presented with a binder of paper, texts between Emile and Stephanie. Quote, will you call me your Mr. Gray? Referencing 50 Shades of Grey. I will sacrifice and give up so much for you. I just never want to let you go. And from April onwards, I can do random and spontaneous. To be with you, I would do anything. End quote. That last text was in January. From April onwards, I can do random and spontaneous. So had he decided to get rid of Vicky in January? Because the accident happened the first weekend of April. He had texted when Vicky was heavily pregnant with Ben, and this continued during Vicky's labor as well. He was also texting Carly about having sex. How much money had Victoria given Emile? Quote, over several years, I loaned him about £18,000, but he also built up debts with loan sharks. End quote. Why had she written him out of her will? She couldn't trust him financially. As a mom, she needed to secure her children's future. Did Vicky believe he tried to kill her for financial gain? Quote, no. At no point would I have suspected him. Emile has his faults, but to an extent he loves me. And he would have at least considered the children. He is an amazing father. I don't believe he would do this to the kids. End quote. Well, she had been on the stand for hours, and her testimony had not gone that great for the prosecution. Heading home, Dad and Frances were very quiet in the car. Vicky had hidden much of what she had testified to in court from them. They had been simply gobsmacked. Arriving home, Vicky acted normal for the kids, and when they settled down, she made the mistake of reading online papers and the comments, quote, is she mad? What's wrong with her? End quote. Another day of testifying. She reviewed how she and Emile met, their first happy years together, and the change in his behavior. And they reviewed his financial track record again. When Vicky had received an insurance payout after the fall, he had wanted to spend it on a trip to South Africa. Vicky spent it on recovering instead. She learned he had visited sex clubs, which shocked her. He had hidden so much from her, squashing all of her suspicions. Did she think he was unfaithful? Yes, he had gotten messages from women that were inappropriate, and his excuses didn't ring quite true. And he was constantly on his phone. He even took it to the toilet. Did she believe Emile had sabotaged her parachute? Quote, I don't know. Everything I knew is a lie, and now I don't know. I still find it hard to comprehend if he did do it. End quote. So, on the whole, Vicky's testimony wasn't exactly a slam dunk for the prosecution. In fact, she was designated a hostile witness. These are also symptoms of coercive control. Emile was still living in her mind. He had manipulated her for years, making her doubt herself, and now she even doubted that her training kicked in when the parachute failed to operate properly. And I have to say this, we are all familiar with the true crime community, including its dark side. Vicky is the victim in this case, and she is receiving hate mail, threats, she's called stupid, and she deserved to die in the jump. Why do that? Why do this to the victim? What do these folks get out of this? Some feeling of superiority, knowing it all? Well, this hurts people, so knock it off. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say it. Treat others as you would want to be treated. Victim bashing is wrong. Everyone reacts differently to traumatic situations that arise, and this had to be an absolute nightmare for her, and my heart goes out to her. Throwing off coercive controls is a process, and it takes time. It can take years, in fact. And Constable Manny Hanna would say of Victoria and Emile Cilliers, quote, he had the strongest hold over anyone that I have ever come across, end quote. Defense attorney Elizabeth Marsh beat up Vicky about the tiny details from that Easter Sunday that she just didn't remember. She asked if Emile had questioned their post-nuptial agreement that put their house in her name alone. No, he had agreed to it. If she had died in the accident, who would get her insurance money? Well, Vicky answered Emile. But the defense pointed out that that was wrong, that it would go to her estate. Wasn't it a fact that Emile was better off with her alive? And Vicky responded, quote, I suppose so, end quote. They reviewed the jump once more, with the defense suggesting that Vicky was suicidal. And she snapped back, quote, no, I was very emotional, but not suicidal, end quote. That night at home, more hate mail arrived. What's wrong with you? Your husband is evil and you're stupid if you don't see that. More vulture-like behavior. Vicky felt unsafe in this massive spotlight. As the trial progressed, old friends began selling stories about her. Her photographer even sold her wedding photos to the press. Betrayal became a daily event, increasing her isolation and heartache. And then after 8 weeks, the trial was concluding and the jurors were sent to deliberate. And then they lost 3 jurors. One had to leave on holiday. The trial was supposed to last 6 weeks, and running over, she now had to leave and didn't have time to deliberate. 2 more were dismissed due to stress and panic attacks. And Vicky laughed. If they thought the trial and deliberations were stressful, try living with this hanging over your head for years. After 8 days of deliberation, the remaining 9 jurors could not agree, and the judge ordered a retrial. And Vicky lost her mind. You have to be fucking kidding me. In the last 2.5 years, she had suffered physically, lost her husband, lost her social life, lost her privacy, and everything was uncertain. Who to believe, what really happened that fateful day? It was an unending nightmare. And to be fair to the jury, if Vicky, the victim, an expert parachutist, wasn't sure her husband had tried to kill her, how could the jury be sure? Now, I'm not blaming Vicky. I can just see how the jurors might have doubt and were unable to reach a conclusion. Well, the retrial was scheduled 5 months away at the following Easter, and Vicky carried on as best she could. April 2018, retrial. Vicky thought she knew what to expect this time, but she really didn't. This time, the prosecution did not hold back to spare Vicky's feelings. Emile's solicitation of prostitutes, his engagement in sex clubs were presented, giving the jurors an eyeful of who this man really was and the selfish double life he had been leading. And thus, the media went in harder as well. Prosecuting barrister Michael Bowles said, quote, "This is a man who cared absolutely nothing for his wife and treated her with absolute contempt. He wanted to be rid of her and wanted to live his own life on his terms. Truth is, he only cared for himself, and he decided to get rid of her permanently," end quote. Shell-shocked, Vicky went numb reading this in the papers. Bowes also read a series of texts from Mrs. Cilliers, Vicky, to some of her friends and to her mother-in-law. Quote, "He has admitted financial fraud and using my money to finance his relationship with his girlfriend. I wouldn't say it openly, but he is a professional con man. He takes tens of thousands of pounds off me. He told his girlfriend we were separated and that our son wasn't his and that I had had an affair. This is not just my opinion. He admitted it all to the police," end quote. Constable Manny Henna would tell Laura Richards on her Crime Analyst podcast that the night before they went to Netheravon Parachute Center, Emile sat next to Vicky on the sofa, his hand affectionately on her knee, making her feel like they might be doing better as a couple. And he was on his phone looking to hire a wet nurse, as he knew his breastfeeding wife would be unavailable after tomorrow to nurse their 5-week-old son. He was looking for a replacement that would be needed because Vicky would be dead. And this screams premeditation. It made me so angry. The prosecution presented very technical details about the gas valves and parachutes. They asked 2 different expert parachute instructors in 2 different parachute centers to tamper with the parachute while leaving it looking perfectly correct, and they filmed and timed them as they did so. Both took just over 5 minutes. They actually demonstrated this during the trial, with the chief instructor going to the bathroom stall and sabotaging the parachute, again taking just 5 minutes. Now, this chief instructor, who is the boss of the Army Parachute Associations, Mark Bayada, operates at Netheravon. He testified that after the fall, as soon as he reached Vicky, he saw some oddities about her kit. All the lines on one side of the parachute were knotted up. As she was lifted onto the stretcher, Bayada got a good view of the lines. Quote, "I could see 2 ends of the risers on the reserve parachute were unattached," end quote. And it was the prosecution's contention that Emile had knotted Vicky's main canopy and removed the slinks from the reserve, which are vital for landing safely. Bayada said he examined everything, trying to find loose stitching in the harness or canopy, bunching on the straps to show they'd been under pressure, burn marks, anything to suggest the slinks had been there and they had somehow come away, but nothing showed evidence of a mechanical failure. This reserve parachute had been inspected 16 times by 10 different advanced packers over its lifetime, and its most recent inspection was 2 months before that Easter Sunday. So to reiterate, last time I spoke about the American Parachute Association, so now we're moving over to the British Parachute Association. They estimate that in 2.3 million jumps from 2005 to 2015, when Vicky fell, 2,900 resulted in reserve parachute deploying. In no case had the main or reserve parachute failed. The single case of both the main and the reserve parachute failing is the case of Stephen Hilder, a 20-year-old officer cadet attending the Royal Military College of Science at the Defense Academy. Hilder fell 13,000 feet or 4,000 meters to his death on 4 July 2003 in Lincolnshire during the National Championship of the British Collegiate Parachute Association. Investigation showed that someone had cut the risers on his reserve, and a murder investigation ensued. Over the course of this investigation, 3 young men were arrested, questioned, and subsequently cleared. 10 months after the death, the authorities concluded the death of Stephen Hilder was likely a suicide. No DNA other than Hilder's was found on his kit, and the scissors used to cut the risers were found in the boot or the trunk of his car, the fibers in the scissors matching that of the risers. It was revealed that Hilder had run up some serious debts, that he and his girlfriend had broken up, and that he was struggling academically. This was why there was some conjecture that Vicky was suicidal the day of her fall. However, we know that is not the case. But in the Hilder case, the coroner returned an open verdict or an open conclusion, which means that the cause of death is unknown due to insufficient evidence to support any other conclusion. Thus, this remains a controversial case. Some in the skydiving community find that the suicide ruling is ridiculous. They think Stephen was murdered. Now, the British Parachute Association's safety and technical officer, Jeff Montgomery, told The Guardian's Alexandra Heel, quote, "There have been a number of suicides over the years in parachuting. Stephen Hilder did everything to try to save his life. He went to and operated the main, but nothing happened. And then he operated his reserve. If you want to kill yourself, you do not try to save your life." End quote. The Worcester News described Stephen Hillier as a young man with a zest for life. The vicar at his funeral said he, quote, "had ahead of him a very, very fine career due to his bravery and common sense," end quote. Early in his life, he had coached primary school kids and converted to Roman Catholicism, indicating a thoughtful and sincere young man. And Stephen is greatly missed by his parents, Paul and Mary Hilder, and his loved ones. But back to Emile's trial. So Victoria comes to the stand again as a hostile witness. She was asked how familiar Emile was with skydiving, and she said he had jumped about 200 times. He also knew how to pack a parachute, having worked and been paid as a packer. Barrister Bose described a course Emile had said he had proudly taken before the fall, and the course was on reserve parachute packing. Quote, "While he never finished the full assessment, he had done enough to give him the knowledge to tamper with one if he wanted to." End quote. Haha. And Emile had bragged during his interview with the Wiltshire police that his trainer said he was the best packer taking the course, and Vicky agreed that this was true. Then they reviewed her actions during the jump and playing her interview that the police had recorded years back. Asked again how long Emile had been in the toilet, Vicky was exasperated, a couple of minutes to at least 5. She insisted that her statement changed because she was angry with Emile as her world had been blown apart. A new evidence book of text messages from Emile was given to Vicky to examine, this time without any redactions, resulting in more heartache, if that was even possible, dragging his affairs out once again. She was hammered by the prosecution and the defense as to whether or not she had lied about this time in the toilet with April. No, she elaborated that she was angry with him and painted him in a bad light. How many times did she have to explain this and suffer the judgment of everyone? Her future was bound up in this. If he was found guilty, the kids would live with the stigma of having a father in prison and a mother who was a dupe who stuck with him. If he was innocent, she and Emile needed to find a way to co-parent going forward, managing some kind of relationship. And then he might try to kill her again. So this is what's going through her mind there. Unlike the first trial, Detective Inspector Paul Franklin was permitted to testify about coercive control and how it affects your thinking, casting a filter over your perceptions of the world, person that you're with, and the situation in the courts concerning Victoria's testimony. It was critically important for the jury to understand why Vicky wasn't clearly supporting her own case. When trauma is too challenging, the unconscious mind protects itself. And this is what's happening with Vicky too. Paraphrasing now, Emile did testify, chewing gum and exuding confidence. He was charming, and he'd make weak jokes that fell flat, trying to be pals with the jury. The defense asked Emile if he harbored any wish to harm his wife or children. No, never. I would never do anything to harm any of them, Emile replied. He was asked about going on holiday with girlfriend Stephanie. I knew I couldn't afford it. I was being stupid and wasn't thinking properly. A text message between them was read. I might leave my job and then we can be together. Were you really considering leaving your job? Miss Marsh asked him. No, I was merely stringing Stephanie along. I was unhappy in my relationship with Vicky, and I think we got married too soon, but I'd planned to stay with her until the baby was 6 weeks old, and then I was going to make a decision. His lack of regard for Vicky was obvious for the jury to see. Miss Marsh argued that while Emile was no Prince Charming, killing Vicky was like killing the cash cow. It made no sense. Quote, he lied to fuel his lust and cover his erratic financial tracks, but his lies were mainly flights of fancy, end quote. Then Emile saw that the jury was not buying any of this, and he got angry, then offended. Then he tried to shed a tear, needing a second to gather himself. But it was clearly fake crying with no tears, like we saw during the Alec Murdaugh trial. Managing one's image is extremely important to psychopaths, and the digital evidence was unnerving, revealing him as a grimy, lying cheat, a selfish, premeditating predator, and not a blameless, misunderstood victim of a harsh legal system. His motive was to bump off his wife and move on to a relationship with his girlfriend, wiping out his debt with the life insurance. And then the 9 men and 3 women went off to deliberate. Since the Criminal Justice Act of 1967, juries in England and Wales can render majority verdicts, not necessarily unanimous verdicts, which I found interesting. And in the eyes of a court, a majority verdict is the equivalent of a unanimous one, so it is not considered a mitigating factor during sentencing. Well, still uncertain of what to think about Emile's trial, Vicky anxiously waited at work, distracting herself. She did not plan to return to court for the verdict. And then, after refreshing her phone 1,000,000 times, an article popped up. Emile Cilliers found guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder in a unanimous verdict. And then she rushed to turn on the TV. Detective Inspector Paul Franklin of the Wiltshire Police Department described Emile as, quote, cold and calculated. What he did was deliberate and done for financial and sexual motives, and there was absolutely no consideration of his wife or anyone else. He serves his own needs, and that makes him a very dangerous man. It was through the diligence of the staff at the Army Parachute Association who brought this to our attention. but it could have been passed off as an accident had they not been so diligent. It was certainly calculated, and there was an opportunity for him to get away with it." End quote. Paul Franklin also discussed the impact of all this on Victoria Cilliers. Quote, "I don't think that we can underestimate the ordeal Victoria has been put through. She has been made to give evidence twice, and again on top of all the physical and emotional trauma she suffered from that horrendous fall, where it is only a miracle, really, that she survived. Physically, she is well, but obviously she's still traumatized and there is a long way for her to go. It has been a very difficult time for her, and it will continue to be for a while." End quote. A few days passed and Vicky received a text from Emile's mom. Quote, "Emile is devastated by the verdict. He still loves you." End quote. Vicky wondered, was she being guilted into forgiving him? All her friends wanted her to despise him, and she did need closure, but she needed to speak to him herself, and she now prepared for the phone call she had thought about for 3 years. The phone rang, and the call came from prison. Quote, "Hi, Vicky, how are you?" End quote. Emile bizarrely asked. Well, saying she was fine, he told her he was preparing for a harsh sentence, and would she visit him in prison? Vicky wasn't sure. She had to think about it, and then the call ended. Well, lackluster, she needed to speak with him again. Going to the prison this time, she recognized Emile, but he wasn't the same man anymore, looking older and worn. She asked him about his infidelities, but really didn't get an answer, though he said it wasn't her fault. And then she asked him, quote, "Did you try to hurt me with the parachute and gas?" "No, I'm innocent," end quote. Emile shook his head before burying it in his hands. While she wasn't sure if she believed him or not, she realized she didn't care. He was a broken man, and leaving prison, she felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The marriage was over. While still battling to fully accept that he had tried to kill her, she realized life was getting better bit by bit, and she was starting to enjoy it again. Sentencing, 21 June 2018. Vicky sat in court emotionless, staring at the floor as to deny reporters any clickbait. The judge read the sentencing statement, the Queen versus Cilliers. Okay, this is long, and I'm not reading you the whole thing. I do have a link to it with other sources on my blog and all that. Bear with me because this is really important. Quote, "Victoria had given her love to you without reservation. However, by 2013, and whatever your feelings had been for her in the early stages, you were leading a double life in which your only guiding compass was your own selfish, emotional, sexual, and financial desires. Indeed, the evidence was clear that you had become contemptuous of your wife. You got or took large amounts of her money, and you avoided repaying her by ever more complicated deceit and lies. And as the messages and emails and evidence clearly showed, you took ruthless advantage of her underlying feelings for you by emotionally coercing her. November 2014, with your wife around 6 months pregnant, you went to Austria for a month and fell for Miss Cilliers. You told her a pack of lies to the effect that you were separated from your wife, having discovered that she had had an affair and the child she was carrying was not yours. In the end, you began an affair. January 2015, you expressed your concern about the potential damage that your wife could do to your career if you fell out. February 2015, your wife gave birth to your son. By then, you had talked with your mother about leaving your wife. After the birth of your son, you gave your wife some help. But below the surface, it remained very different. You were keeping the relationship with Miss Cilliers going, making plans for a holiday in Honduras that summer, and for your long-term future together. At the same time, you were having sexual relations with various other women, including your former wife, and you remained in considerable financial difficulties. As a result, you determined to kill your wife by causing a gas explosion in the kitchen of your family home, even though your children were going to be in the house at the time of the explosion. Sunday, 29 March 2015. You told your wife you needed to stay at the barracks that night. Once your wife and children were safely in bed upstairs, and employing your knowledge and do-it-yourself skills, you used a pair of adjustable locking pliers and a wrench to open the top nut on the gas valve adjacent to the gas hob and electric oven. You opened the nut just far enough to cause a leak, but not so much that it would be difficult to explain away if there was no explosion. The following morning, your wife realized there was a gas leak. She contacted you, and you effectively suggested that she turn the hob on. She was much more sensible and took appropriate precautions to avoid any risk of an explosion. Even before the engineer attended to fix the gas leak, you were texting your wife, asking her if she wanted to skydive that weekend, and flattered by some attention, indicated that she was interested. What she did not know was that you had seen the opportunity for a second attempt on her life. As you knew, she would have to hire a rig from the APA. If that could be sabotaged and then she fell to her death, any malfunction could be blamed on an accident, the negligence. 4 April 2015. You, your wife, and both your children went to Netherabon, where you hired a rig for your wife. After you got it, your daughter said she wanted to go to the toilet, and you seized the opportunity that provided and took her to the men's toilet, taking the rig with you. There, using your knowledge of parachutes, you sabotaged the reserve chute by removing the slinks from the two right-hand risers and sabotaged the main parachute by pulling out the lines. You left no external trace of what you had done and knew that it would not be revealed by pre-flight checks. The fact that you did that, intending to kill your wife in the presence of your young daughter, speaks volumes about the sort of person you are and the gravity of your offending. The weather was not good enough to jump that afternoon. Rather than hand the rig back to the kit store as would be the norm, but which would carry the risk that she would be given a different rig the next day, you persuaded your wife to keep it overnight in her locker. Sunday, 5 April 2015. Victoria returned to Netherabon, whilst you remained at home with the children. The weather was less than ideal. To ensure that you succeeded in killing her, you encouraged her in messages to stay and jump. Later, the weather was good enough for Victoria to do a hop and pop jump from around 3,800 feet. Her main parachute malfunctioned as you intended it would. She cut it away and triggered her reserve parachute. But as you intended, it also malfunctioned. Only the left side of the canopy inflated, and she began to spiral violently as she fell to earth, passing out from the G-forces. Those who saw what happened and went to where she had fallen expected to find a dead body. They even took a body bag with them. But miraculously, and albeit in very seriously injured, she survived. Expert examination of the parachutes led to the conclusion that sabotage may have been the cause of the malfunctions, and a police investigation began. Victoria was released from the hospital on 22 April 2015. You were arrested and interviewed on 28 April and in September 2015. In the April interviews, you said that your marriage was over. In the September interviews, you said you had a change of heart, and I have no doubt that that change was a tactical move rather than genuine. End quote. The judge now weighed mitigating factors, and then came the sentencing. Quote, you are reckless and single-minded, with significant deficits in thinking and behavior, and that you enjoy taking risks no matter what the cost. You are an expert in manipulation. You are plainly capable of planning someone's murder simply to meet your own selfish needs, and you demonstrate an ability to orchestrate a complex plan which required an unprecedented level of calm under significant pressure. I also agree that the alarming level of self-belief and single-mindedness that you demonstrate are cause for significant concern. I also agree with the prosecution that you have shown yourself to be a person of quite exceptional callousness who will stop at nothing to gratify his own desires, material or otherwise, nor have you shown the slightest sign of remorse. In my view, you are a dangerous offender. There were 2 attempts to murder your wife. They both involve abuse of trust. The first also involved being reckless as to endanger the lives of your children. It is miraculous that the second did not result in your wife's death, but you intended her to suffer a dreadful death. I have concluded that a life sentence is justified. Mr. Justice Sweeney. That was long. It was actually a lot longer. This is a raw and devastating rendition of Emile Cilliers' action. Hearing this, the truth of it hit Vicky probably for the first time, and she finally understood that Emile Cilliers was a monster. Sentenced to life, he would serve a minimum of 18 years. Vicky told the Guardian's Alexandra Heel that it was difficult to accept the verdict. Quote, "I'm hurt and angry, but can I see him as capable of murder? No, I am going to grieve for the marriage that I had and the end of the life I had. I'll always care for the father of my children, and I loved him. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with him. I have to go with the verdict. It's too big to get my head around. It's hard to comprehend that someone you married and had children with would be capable of that. I love the husband I used to have and not the one he became." End quote. Slipping out the back door to avoid the media, she and a friend went out for a drink, and a gazillion articles swirled about the dangerous, coercive, manipulative Emile Cilliers, and it continued for weeks, and Victoria Cilliers coming to fully agree. She also had answers to some of April's questions about Daddy. She explained that Daddy wasn't here anymore because he had been bad and had to go to jail. And that was enough for now. Eventually, April asked what Daddy had done, and Vicky explained he'd done a bad thing to Mummy's parachute, which was why she had the accident. "Why did he do that?" And Vicky said she didn't know. Could April visit? No, little children can't go there, but she could see him when she was 24. Gradually, questions died down as she had a child-size amount of information to process. Ben had no working memory of Emile, and he was only told that Daddy was in prison. But in this day of the internet, Vicky knows she can't protect them. But hopefully, that would come later rather than sooner, and she'd be able to tell them the whole story. She began to let go of the whole sordid mess and moved forward, except Emile bombarded her with letters and phone calls. At first she wrote back, and he wrote letters of affection and love, which she now saw as oppressive and controlling. He wanted her to visit, and she decided to go because she would ask her questions, gain some clarity, and leave. Arriving with divorce papers, Emile was taken aback. Their marriage wasn't over, they had a future. And he would write to her solicitor insisting that they should continue the marriage, and it would take over 18 months to finalize Vicky's divorce. Over the next few months, Vicky grew stronger and stopped engaging with Emile. Realizing he wasn't getting anywhere, his calls stopped. She understood that their relationship was toxic. The weight of guilt and second-guessing lifted from her. Quote, "Accepting that the man who was supposed to love me unconditionally was in fact abusive was the most difficult thing I have ever processed. I was trapped. Reflecting on the person I had been when Emile was around, I don't even recognize myself. It took escaping Emile's control to accept that he had ever been controlling at all. And it took some time on my own to figure out and fully accept that Emile was guilty of trying to kill me." End quote. Oh, I cheered for her coming to this insight and the liberation she must have felt in realizing all of this. Quote, I have seen just how sinister and insidious domestic abuse can be, and I have only come out the other side. I am more confident now in what I want out of life, and what I want is freedom to live my life with my children by my side and be able to move on. End quote. And she has. Briefly speaking to Sarah Oliver, a reporter, after the second trial ended, Oliver asked Vicky if she would ever jump again. And smirking, Vicky quipped, quote, I will if you will, end quote, with Sarah accepting. So Vicky decided to raise money for the Wiltshire Air Ambulance, who had saved her life that terrible day. Getting her doctors to sign approvals, they were elated for Vicky. Now, doing it at Netheravon seemed wrong. They had suffered being in the spotlight during this whole ordeal, and it didn't seem fair to shine the light on them now. So she found another parachute center. But as the day approached, they called and canceled, fearing negative publicity, even concerning a charity event. Baffled, Vicky insisted that she hadn't done anything wrong. And skydiving is a tight community, so that this center wanted nothing to do with her broke her heart. Phoning a friend at another center, she was assured that she could jump there, no problem. But after such a trauma, it was still frightening. Vicky decided to do a tandem dive with her dear friend Nick, because accidents do happen. And she pushed on, needing certainty to replace this vortex of uncertainty. The sky was blue, the autumn sun was shining as the chilly wind blew. As they took off, Vicky began to cry, unable to stop the tears. Climbing about 2 miles up, she was surrounded by friends, filled with support and reassurance. The plane leveled, and the door opened, and the cold air whipped through the aircraft, and she felt empowered and wanted to jump. Giving Nick a thumbs up, they moved towards the exit and leaned forward. Amazing. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, weightless as she looked up and saw smiling faces, all in free fall. She let the pain and the fear go as Nick tugged on the cord and the parachute billowed, jolting upward. The rapid plummet slowed into a controlled descent, and the drop zone and field came into view, as did her kids, April shouting, Mommy, Mommy, and Ben squealing as they conducted a textbook landing. The kids ran over, hugging Vicky, who glanced up at her dad with tears in his eyes. Sarah came over as Vicky was being congratulated. After all the previous horrors, why had she jumped again? Quote, I made a fantastic physical recovery. In psychological terms, my head has been lagging behind, and jumping was an integral part of fixing that, end quote. She learned she had raised over 5,000 pounds and considered it a stunning success. Reading Sarah's article, she reluctantly glanced at the comments, and there was not one negative response. She had jumped and felt free of the past, putting her fears behind as well. The kids are thriving, and Vicky is taking life as it comes, doing it on her own terms. In December 2018, she filed for that divorce and jettisoned Emile officially into the past. It took her a long time to see clearly how coercive and manipulative he had been, but no longer. And she did a Zoom call with the officers who worked on her case and thanked them for the hard work that she fully understands now. Vicky Cilliers was a guest on the British TV program Loose Women in 2024. It took her some time to admit that Emile had tried to kill her, partly out of fear. She explained that she had no idea if he'd be convicted or not. If he wasn't, or was given a short sentence, and she had testified hardcore against him, what would happen when he was out? If he had really tried twice to kill her, would she be in danger again? And recall, The police were rather closed-mouthed about the evidence they had, much coming into light and shocking Vicky during the first trial. So I think we can understand why it took her the time it did. We really, really shouldn't be critical of victims or survivors. So as of late 2024, strong and happy, Vicky, now 48, married, yes, 53-year-old former Marine who proposed to her during a romantic meal in Edinburgh. He is also a parachuter, so she did not have to explain a thing about her past. In fact, he was there the day she nearly died. 11-year-old April was her mummy's bridesmaid, and Vicky, April, and Ben have all dropped the last name Cilliers. Emile is locked up with way too much time on his hands. He sued Vicky to gain money from their house. If you recall, it was in her name alone because they had used her grandmother's inheritance to fund it. So she had to go to court to deal with all of that nonsense. Also interviewed on British TV, the Loose Women morning show, in 2024 was Nicolene Shepherd, the mother of Emile's two oldest children, Trevor and Celine. Nicolene said that she got with Emile when she was 13 and he was 17 years old. They had their first child when she was 16. Looking back, Nicolene recognizes the coercive behaviors that we've discussed. Everything was very much about him and how he wanted things, insisting on being the center of the universe. Now, this was Nicolene's first real relationship, and she spoke of having this inkling, as she put it, that there would be consequences unless her behavior conformed to his expectations. Well, wanting to please him and keep the peace, Nicolene changed. After their second child together, they got engaged, and then he went off to England to satisfy his needs, leaving her alone with their two babies. Now Emile met Carly, who he would marry. So his pattern: whirlwind love bombing, fall in love, have two children to create a dependency, get bored as real life happens, and move on to the next woman who you love bomb, fall in love, marry, have two children, get bored. He and Carly were separated when he met Vicky, and repeat the pattern: love bombing, gaslighting, marriage, two children to create a dependency. He meets Stephanie, who he tells Vicky has cheated on him. Ben isn't his son, denying paternity. It all becomes pretty obvious when you look at his actions and his history. Truly, this is one of the most extreme cases of coercive control that I have heard about. And what I realize is that Emile Cilliers has an innate social ability to read and understand the emotions of people around him, which enables him to manipulate these emotions. He's able to hone in on the vulnerabilities of the women that he will victimize. He reads Vicky's emotional temperature. In her case, she was divorced in her 30s, desiring children. Her biological clock is ticking, and he exploits this. He knows that she didn't want to be divorced once, let alone twice, and certainly not after having children together, and continues striving to get back to those blissful early days so she'll adapt herself so she can make it better. And he knows this, and he exploits this by reading her with his psychopathic radar. And Victoria Cilliers, she is a good and decent person, so she thinks that Emile is a good and decent person too. And she is terribly, terribly wrong. I've said this before, but I did a lot of research for this series and listened to the authority on coercive control, Laura Richards. So please support her Crime Analyst podcast. Coercive control is about power and control in domestic relationships that can include physical and or emotional violence. Another thing I realized about Emile: his method of murder is one step removed. He puts a layer between the method of killing and himself. He sabotages a gas valve. Now, Vicky is supposed to act. She's supposed to turn on the cooker and actually blow herself and the children up. He's not doing anything. He only played with a valve. She's going to blow them up. Well, this fails. So a week later, he sabotages her parachutes. But still, Vicky would be putting it on and choose to jump out of the plane. I believe he is justifying to himself that he really is not at fault here. She had to do this to cause her death. It is ridiculous, but psychopaths blame everybody else, never accepting responsibility for their actions, and recalls at the prison, he's still denying to Vicky that he did this, because in his mind, she did it. It was her fault, even though it's clear he was committed to murdering his wife. Now, this brings me to another point. We hear about the abusive relationships, high conflict divorces, toxic relationships, dysfunctional relationships, teenage breakup violence. Okay, the language must be better by addressing who is doing what to whom. Too often, there is an abuser and one who is reacting to the abuser. Coercive control abusers highlight the actions of the other person, making it look off or inappropriate, while it's actually about survival. And there can be a serious mismatch about who is doing what to whom. In the UK, 1 woman every 4 days is murdered by partners or former partners. In the US, it's 3 every day, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the Violent Policy Center. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime indicates that globally, that 1 woman every 10 minutes is murdered. We must do better with our sons and daughters. And that concludes my trilogy on I Survived by Vicky Cilliers. And our next book is Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter by Troy A. Hillman. Hot off the presses, this engaging true crime book only came out October 7th, 2025. You really need to read this one with me. Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter is an extraordinarily detailed inside story of how an ex-CPA turned detective, Troy Hillman, and an elite team of detectives forge a cold case unit determined to solve a brutal double murder that has haunted Phoenix, Arizona for 2 decades. The 2 victims were found headless, assaulted while riding their bicycles. Somewhere in that file, there must be a clue that was overlooked. But could they find it and get a serial killer off the streets and bring justice to the families? Part 1, coming soon. Thank you for listening. I do have some special episodes in the works that'll be dropping on our off weeks as I strive to give you some fascinating content about the best true crime books. I appreciate you joining me on this journey. If you are going to CrimeCon 2026 in Las Vegas, you can use my code, 1 word, lowercase letters, MurderShelf, and save 10% on your badge. If you enjoy the podcast, please share it with friends and family and leave a positive 5-star review. All of my sources, photographs, articles, recipe, and drink links are on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, November 2025. For questions or comments, contact me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com. Follow me on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Additionally, you can join my Patreon for $2 to $4 a month and help choose the next book I'll feature. And I am teaching my serial killer class. See you in 2 weeks, Murder Bookies. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.